What is up, guys? Richter Kackenstein here. Thank you so much for stopping by, and today we are going to be going over 10 auto rifles that you absolutely want to get your hands on for next season. Now, this is not going to be a traditional top 10 list like ranked from worst to best or anything like that. What we're really doing is highlighting some phenomenal weapons, 3 different auto rifles from each of the different auto rifle archetypes that are being buffed, and then 1 additional slot. Also, I made sure that all of these weapons we're going over today are still acquirable. It's not much of a point telling you how good an old Festival of the Lost auto rifle is if none of you can get it if you don't already have it, right? So all of these are farmable. We're going to go over the roles of all of them. There's just so much content in one video, so let's get started. But first, do you guys like free stuff? Well, how about a pair of ASTRO A40s plus the mix amp? That's what we're giving away for free. All you gotta do to enter, don't worry, this is an actual competition, not just trying to inflate the video values. So instead of liking and subscribing and favoriting and sharing, all you gotta do is follow me on Twitter at RickKackis and tweet at me something with the hashtag KackAttack. And the winner will be announced in a couple days. If you're super impatient, you can always click the link in the description down below, which applies a discount to any ASTRO product. Alright, now let's talk about auto rifles. Funny enough, I did make a similar video back with Shadow Keep when auto rifles got a massive PvE buff. However, this video is going to be much more PvP slanted, as the buffs are going to apply there as well. With that being said, increasing the base damage is also going to buff it in PvE too, so don't think it doesn't apply to both aspects of the game. Alright, now another important thing to note is that we are not going over any high impact frame auto rifles. Although this patch note was in the TWAB, this is incorrect, and the auto rifles of this archetype already have this damage. So those are not being buffed, it's just the other 3 archetypes. Starting us off, we do have the precision frame archetype. These are going from currently 17 body damage and 25.5 headshot damage to 17 body damage and 27.2 precision damage. So that means you get no additional damage for shooting in the body, therefore accuracy is very important with these weapons. So starting us off here, we have the Uriel's Gift. This has been added to the legendary world drop loot pool. It is definitely more difficult to get, but you get it for doing literally anything in the game, potentially. So, taking a look at the stats here, pretty average for this archetype. Moving on to the perks, this is where things get interesting. You do have some great options, and I'm looking at high caliber rounds to increase the flinch, especially with something like an auto rifle where you are hitting them so regularly that flinch can really add up and matter. Moving on from there to that first perk slot, for a PvP oriented role, you're looking for potentially quick draw, but I'm looking for Firmly Planted. Firmly Planted is a very underrated perk. If you crouch, it massively increases your accuracy and stability. And if you're a console player, this is nearly essential. It is going to make your gun an absolute laser beam and allow you to consistently put rounds on enemies' heads from across the map, which again, if you're just getting a headshot damage buff, that's very important. In the second category, there is some good options. Tap the trigger for even more accuracy at the start of a gunfight, but also moving target is pretty good as well. Increases your movement speed and target acquisition while aiming down sights, which means that you can be aiming down sights and strafing side to side faster than your opponent. They're going to be missing you, and you shouldn't be missing them. Alright, moving on from there, we have the Hazard of the Cast legendary kinetic auto rifle. This comes from Gambit, and looking at the stats, the notable one here is the range. This has one of the best base range stats of this archetype, so that means you won't need much to improve it. Looking at the perks, we do have some great ballistics. Arrowhead Break is probably the one I would recommend going for to help with the recoil and handling, because the rest of the stats are totally fine. Then high caliber rounds, again for that flinch. After that, you do have some good options. I would be looking for Tap the Trigger, maybe Zen Moment, but Tap the Trigger helps right off the bat. Then in that second category, we have some more great options. Rampage just for potentially extending streaks. It's pretty easy to get a double kill with this type of weapon with 33 rounds in the magazine. Then we've got Quick Draw as well, and I think going for tap the trigger Quick Draw is going to be the more PvP focused role, and that's just going to give you a very snappy, responsive gun. Great stats, so don't need much to improve that. Moving on from there, we have another kinetic auto rifle here, and this is the Tiger Spite. This comes from the Dreaming City, so going there and farming bounties, stuff from Petra, potentially even doing the Shattered Throne dungeon, all that stuff will drop it. Stats pretty good, almost Hazard of the Cast range, but not quite. We do have some good perks off the start, like the same kind of ballistics as well. Arrowhead Break is here, but so is Full Bore and Hammer Forged Rifling if you really want to pump up the range and let this weapon compete outside its usual engagement range. And you can do that with the Hazard of the Cast as well, although it's less necessary. High caliber rounds is here. Light mag even is a pretty good choice, but in that first perk category, I think this time we do also have tap the trigger, but I would be looking for firstly Outlaw. Precision kills greatly decrease reload time, and then you combine that with Kill Clip. Reloading after a kill grants increased damage, and Kill Clip plus Outlaw is an absolute wombo combo, allowing you to get a precision kill, reload super fast, and get that damage bonus up and running. And then you can start chaining kills together with that increase in damage. This is a combo, and especially with this gun, that you should be looking for, because this belongs to the most accurate auto rifle archetype, and so getting those precision kills to activate Outlaw is pretty easy with this weapon. However, it is time to move on to the next archetype, which is the Adaptive Frame 600 rounds per minute archetype. This is getting a buff going from currently 13.75 body, 22 head, to 15.75 body, 25 head. This is one of the archetypes that people are most excited about, because going from 22 damage to 25 damage just means it's essentially one shot less to kill, and that is a huge deal. The increase in body shot damage as well means that spraying and praying is a little bit more viable with this archetype, and you don't need to go all in on precision. So, looking at the first weapon, we have the Arc Logic Legendary Energy Auto Rifle. This comes from farming the Lectern of Enchantment on the Moon. Very, very farmable weapon. And looking at the stats here, pretty good overall, boasting extremely good handling. Looking at the perks here, there are a lot of good options. Starting with the barrels, Arrowhead Break and stuff is still good, but this is the archetype you want to start looking for range, so perhaps Hammer Forged Rifling, Full Bore, that stuff becomes more viable. In that second perk slot, Accurized Rounds to even further increase the range is absolutely excellent, but steady rounds, especially if you're rocking Full Bore plus steady rounds to kind of compensate for each other, that's a pretty good option as well. In that first perk slot, we do have Outlaw being pretty darn decent, but Moving Target, especially for a PvP role, is present here as well. In that second perk slot, a lot of good options. Demolitionist is pretty darn viable, and especially considering you can throw your grenade and get your 40 round magazine back instantaneously is pretty important. We have Rampage being a highlight here, especially when you combine Rampage plus Outlaw to just be chaining again those high damaging kills. But going for Tap the Trigger or Rangefinder is both going to be excellent choices for a PvP role. Something like Moving Target, Rangefinder, Accurized Rounds like Full Bore or Hammer Forged, just for that max range role where you're challenging people from distances they don't quite expect from this archetype. That could be something worth going after. Now moving on from there, we have a very interesting one, the Galliard 42 XN7568. This is a legendary energy auto rifle, and this comes from Forge activities. Now, this doesn't come from the 8-1 weapon frames. Instead, this just drops randomly when doing forges and also killing those forge wardens located around the world. So don't ignore those guys, because this is a pretty cracked auto rifle. Stats are pretty good across the board, and the perk selection is actually excellent. So instead of a barrel, you have a choice of scopes, and you could go with a high zoom optic, similar to going with a high zoom optic on a fusion rifle. That's going to improve your range overall, but a short to medium range optic is also a good choice for better target acquisition, easier target acquisition in those close quarter engagements. Moving on from there, we do have high caliber rounds making an appearance, again increasing the flinch, especially with this archetype. That is going to matter. Light mag is going to be a good choice as well, and potentially armor piercing rounds for that little bit of increased range. Then in that first perk category, we have a lot of good options. Quick draw and snapshot sights are present if you want that quick responding snappy weapon. We also have outlaw here and tap the trigger. Both would be good. Combine that with, on the other side, we have rampage. So rampage, outlaw, absolutely a combo. But of course, we have the classic wombo combo, kill clip, outlaw being present. And I think going for something like a good optic, ricochet rounds or high caliber rounds, outlaw, kill clip, that's a great role. But you can also again go for like a rangefinder role. You can have the moving target as well. This has so many good options. It's hard to go wrong with this weapon. This is something that I don't have a good role, and I am definitely going to be farming. And lastly, for this archetype, we have the Gnawing Hunger. This is a legendary energy auto rifle, and this comes from farming Reckoning activities. Technically also Gambit Prime, but Reckoning is your best bet. This is a PvE all-star, but looking at the stats, this boasts one of the best base ranges of all of the auto rifles in the adaptive frame archetype. So that's a really key feature. Looking at the perks, you can even increase this further by going for things like Hammer Forged or potentially even Extended Barrel. Combining that with, in the second category, Accurized Rounds for even more range is going to give you that role that's just going to let you compete at ranges people don't expect. But steady rounds, especially if you're on console, is a good choice as well. Moving on to that first perk slot, it's okay. Tap the trigger is probably the best option here. Zen Moment is alright. The second category has some good options. Make no mistake, tap the trigger plus Rampage or tap the trigger plus Swashbuckler or even Demolitionist is going to be probably your best bet here. It's definitely more PvE oriented stuff. This is really here for the reasons of very good range, and then the fact that you can get like Hammer Forged and Accurized and tap the trigger and Rampage. Like, that role is going to be very good in PvP. But it's time to move on to the last auto rifle archetype, the rapid fire frame archetype. This is getting buffed, going from currently 12.5 body, 18.75 head to 13.4 body, 20 to the head. So a pretty significant buff there. Again, body shots being affected means that spraying and praying is a little bit more viable. Firstly, we do have the Reckless Oracle. This legendary energy auto rifle is from the Garden of Salvation raid. So absolutely harder to get, but one of the better weapons of this archetype. Looking at the stats, the stability is off the charts, very high for this archetype. And then moving on to the perks, we have a lot of great options in the barrels. You are looking for something like, Hammer Forged, potentially Extended Barrel, maybe full bore if you are on PC, just to extend the range as high as possible. If you're on console, the recoil will become an issue, so potentially Arrowhead Break is your best bet there. Looking at the perks, however, I think you're really going for, potentially Light Mag or Ricochet, but high cal. High cal with how fast this thing is shooting is going to be insane. The first perk category, we do have Outlaw as absolutely the best choice here. Like, maybe Mulligan if you're really spraying and praying, because your magazine is going to be extended quite a bit, like by every shot you miss. But I think you're really going for Outlaw, and you're trying to combine that with Kill Clip or Swashbuckler, maybe Demolitionist. In fact, Demolitionist on this gun, because it deals Void Weapon, is actually a combo with Nezarec's Sin, so keep that in mind. But I think Outlaw, Kill Clip, or Outlaw, Swashbuckler, again, that's a wombo combo. That's what you're going for. Great stats across the board, a powerful weapon to get. Moving on from there, sticking to this archetype, we have a much easier to get, much more farmable weapon, especially now with Imperium Foundation, the Steel Feather Repeater. This is a kinetic weapon, and looking at the stats, they're average. Like, the stats are not where this weapon stands out. It's really the perks. So, great selection of barrels yet again. Then we do have high caliber rounds again, ricochet rounds again as well. But looking at that first perk tier, I think you're really going for either Feeding Frenzy, just to chain together kills, especially when you combine it with some of the damage increasing perks like Swashbuckler and, especially multi-kill clip in that second tier. But for PvP, Firmly Planted. This archetype does have a decent amount of recoil, and being able to crouch and just dome people with a laser is very, very powerful. Now, combining that with something like Swashbuckler, especially because for this archetype, you're going to be, closer than ever with this archetype in combat, so getting a melee off after a few shots is really not that difficult, and then Swashbuckler is going to be at its best. But also, Vorpal Weapon. A new perk, increased damage against bosses, vehicles, and guardians with their super active. Make no mistake, you can gun someone down if they're charging at you with their super up, like if it's a Titan with a Fist of Havoc and he thinks he got you. A Vorpal Weapon Steel Feather, 49 rounds, rapid fire, you are killing that guy for sure. So that is potentially something to watch out for as well. But one other thing worth mentioning is Elemental Capacitor, simply because if you're using Void subclasses, you're going to get increased stability, which matters quite a bit with this archetype, so keep that in mind. Moving on from there, the last weapon of this archetype we're covering is the Valakadon, Legendary Energy Auto Rifle, or however the heck you pronounce that. This is going to be from the Gunsmith. So this is actually a really easy weapon to get, considering like myself, and I'm sure a lot of you guys watching have so much darn Gunsmith materials. But the rolls you can get are very, very good. So lots of different barrels. We've kind of been over what's good for this archetype. Then we do have high caliber rounds making an appearance. Ricochet rounds and light mag are not going to be bad either. Then we've got the snappier options. Quick draw and snapshot are both present. Tap the trigger for better accuracy, even potentially dynamic sway reduction for increased accuracy. But you can go for the outlaw wombo combo roll, because in that second category, both rampage and kill clip are present. So make no mistake, going for an outlaw kill clip Valakadon, that is a pretty dirty combo. But if you're not interested in that, we do have some more PvP oriented perks, like firstly, Rangefinder. Rangefinder on this archetype and trying to extend the range as much as possible is definitely a viable thing. And we also have Moving Target, where you're going to be strafing a lot in those close range gunfights, and every shot is going to count. So on this weapon, either going for the wombo of Outlaw plus Kill Clip I would recommend, or going for something like Quick Draw or Snapshot or Tap the Trigger combined with Rangefinder or Moving Target for that very PvP oriented role. Alright, so that is it for the top 3 auto rifles of each different archetype. We have one more remaining, and that one more is the exotic auto rifles. Now this is maybe cheating a bit, but I didn't want, all of the slots taken up by the exotics, and also I'm combining them into one category because it's hard to know which exotic auto rifle is going to be most impacted positively by these changes, if at all. The weird thing is that although likely, very likely, the exotic auto rifles are going to be getting better as part of these buffs, it is a little nebulous because, for an example, the Monte Carlo shoots at 600 rounds per minute. It should be an adaptive frame archetype, but because it's exotic, it technically doesn't have adaptive frame. Instead, it has the Monte Carlo method as its exotic intrinsic perk. So will it also be getting a damage buff as if it was an adaptive frame, or because it technically not, will it remain at its current damage, or are we going to see these different auto rifles buffed individually in future patch notes? We don't really know the concrete answer, and that's why I'm throwing them all in here, because regardless, it's still a good idea to get your hands on these exotic auto rifles because, again, the potential for them to get very, very powerful is there. The Hard Light got a pretty recent buff, and it's performing decently across the board. The Sweet Business is actually low-key a very powerful weapon. Suros Regime, Monte Carlo, and even the Cerberus +1. I mean, the Cerberus +1 just got a catalyst not too long ago either, so it's worth looking at that as well. any of these weapons, and all of these weapons are things that you should potentially look at getting. Guys, that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed, found this informative, and if you did, please remember to help me out by simply rating and especially sharing this video. If you guys want to see more Destiny 2 content similar to this, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. If you want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at RickKackis. That's linked in the description down below. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.